Nora felt the sting of the champagne before she felt the wetness. Her mother-in-law Matilda had accidentally tossed the entire glass on her, the bubbles soaking her cheap dress. "Worthless," Matilda hissed loud enough for the garden party guests to hear. "You can't even stand still without ruining everything." Nora's husband, Liam, looked at his shoes. She was the family's punching bag, their Cinderella, without a fairy godmother. But they were all about to make a terrible mistake. They thought Nora was nobody. They didn't know about her grandfather. And they definitely didn't know about the army he commanded. Life for Nora Ashford was a masterclass in invisibility. She lived in the sprawling 5-bedroom executive home of her in-laws, Gregory and Matilda Ashford, yet she occupied less space than the potted ficus in the hallway. Her days were a quiet loop of chores performed on eggshells. She woke before the family made coffee. She wasn't allowed to drink. Matilda preferred her expensive pod-based machine and prepared breakfast only to eat a piece of dry toast in the laundry room while the family Matilda Gregory and their spoiled daughter Chloe discussed their day at the dining table. Nora had met Liam Ashford in college. He was then a man separate from his family kind, a little shy with a warmth that seemed to fill all the cracks in her own quiet life. She was an orphan or so she'd told him. It was the simplest explanation. They fell in love with the gentle, inevitable pull of a tide. He was her anchor. Then they married. The wedding was small. Nora had no one to invite, and the Ashfords were already signaling their disapproval. "A library assistant," Matilda had scoffed, her voice like grinding glass. "Liam, you could have had a doctor, a lawyer, a Rothschild, and you bring us this." From the day she moved into the Ashford home, the anchor Liam was supposed to be became a chain. The family was new money, having clawed their way to suburban affluence through Gregory's moderately successful import-export business. They were desperate to be seen as old money, and Nora, with her worn cardigans, her quiet demeanor, and her complete lack of a dowry or connections, was a stain on their perfect beige-carpeted image. Nora the Silver needs polishing, Matilda would call just as Nora was settling down to read. And use the good polish, not that cheap stuff you like. "Nora, my golf clubs are still in the trunk," Gregory would grunt, tossing his car keys onto the table, never making eye contact. "See to it." "Nora," Chloe would whine, "this report for my marketing class is so boring. Can't you just write it for me? It's not like you do anything important." Her worst tormentor, however, was Matilda. She was a woman who weaponized passive aggression. She would accidentally donate Nora's clothes to charity. She would forget to set a place for her at dinner when guests were over. "Oh, Nora, are you still here?" she'd say with a theatrical gasp. "I'm so sorry, darling, we're just so cramped. Would you mind eating in the kitchen? Mrs. Henderson is telling us all about her trip to Aspen." And Liam, the man she loved. He was a ghost in his own home. He loved Nora. She knew it. In the rare moments they were alone, hidden in their bedroom, he was the same man she'd married. "I'm sorry, Ellie," he'd whisper, kissing her hair. "They're just stressed. Dad's business isn't great. They'll warm up. I promise." But the promises were as empty as the praise she never received. When his family was present, Liam would shrink. He'd find an urgent email to answer. He'd stare at his phone. He'd nod silently when Matilda said, "Liam, darling, Nora's presence is really bringing down the mood. Can't you talk to her?" Talk to her, as if she were a misbehaving dog. The present day was Chloe's 25th birthday party, a lavish garden affair, designed to showcase the Ashfords' status. Nora had been tasked with helping the hired catering staff. "It's the least you can do, seeing as you didn't contribute to the gift," Matilda had said that morning, pointedly looking at the small, hand-bound book of poetry Nora had bought for Chloe. Matilda had picked it up with 2 fingers and dropped it in the recycling bin. "We don't need more clutter." So here Nora was in a simple navy blue dress, the only one she owned that wasn't stained or frayed, carrying a tray of champagne flutes. "You see that dress?" one of Chloe's friends whispered not quietly enough. "It's from a department store, a discount one." Chloe laughed a high-pitched, cruel sound. "She is the discount one. My brother's bargain bin wife." Nora kept her head down, her cheeks burning. She just had to get through the day. She navigated the flagstone patio, her hands steady, when Chloe's fiancé, a smug young man named Chad, stepped backwards without looking. He collided with Nora. The tray tilted. A dozen champagne flutes, from real crystal rented for the occasion, smashed onto the stone, spraying expensive champagne and glass shards over Matilda's pristine white roses. The party went silent. Nora's blood ran cold. I'm so sorry, You. Matilda's voice was a low, dangerous viper's hiss. She stormed across the lawn, her face a mask of purple rage. "You clumsy, worthless little fool!" She didn't stop. She swung her arm back and slapped Nora across the face. The sound was as sharp and clean as the breaking glass. Nora's head snapped to the side, her hand flying to her stinging cheek. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Look at this!" Matilda shrieked, pointing at the mess. "Look what you've done, hundreds of dollars in crystal ruined. You can't do one single thing right, can you? You are a walking disaster, a leech. My son has to pay to be married to you." Nora looked at Liam, her eyes pleading. He stood frozen by the barbecue, a spatula in his hand, his face pale. He looked at his mother. He looked at Nora. He looked at the ground. He said nothing. That single resounding silence was louder than the slap. It was the sound of Nora's last thread of hope snapping. "Clean it up!" Gregory boomed, his face red with embarrassment. "Now, get a dustpan and stay in the kitchen for the rest of the night. You've embarrassed us enough." Nora, her vision swimming with tears she refused to let fall, knelt on the stone and began picking up the shards of broken glass with her bare hands as the party slowly, awkwardly resumed around her. Nora wasn't an orphan. She was a Vance. The name Vance didn't mean much to most people. It wasn't plastered on skyscrapers or splashed across tabloids. The Vances didn't do new money. They were the kind of old money that owned the companies that built the skyscrapers. They were the silent bedrock wealth that wars, recessions, and scandals couldn't touch. They were the money that funded governments, that owned islands, that treated billionaire as a slightly vulgar term for people who still had to count. Her grandfather, Cornelius Vance, was the patriarch. He was a man who could and had made stock markets pivot with a single quiet phone call. He was also the man who had raised Nora after her parents, his only son, and his beloved daughter-in-law died in a tragic sailing accident when she was 6. Growing up as Nora Vance was a life of profound privilege and profound isolation. She was educated by private tutors, flew on private jets, and had a security detail before she could ride a bike. But the wealth was, as her grandfather always said, a poisoned chalice. "It's a wall, Nora," he'd told her one evening in the vast mahogany-paneled library of their New York estate. She was 20, home from her first year at Yale. It surrounds you, it protects you, but it also prevents you from ever knowing if someone sees you or if they just see the vault. He had seen it his whole life. Sycophants, takers, men and women who would prostrate themselves for a taste of the Vance power. He'd seen his own son marry a woman who, while lovely, was more in love with the idea of being a Vance than the man himself. So he proposed an idea, a test, an agreement. "Go," he said, his voice gentle but firm as granite. "When you graduate, take a new name, my mother's maiden name, Hart, Nora Hart. Take a stipend enough to live simply, not enough to draw attention. For 5 years. Live a normal life. Get a normal job. Find people who love Nora Hart. Find a man who loves you for your mind and your heart, not for the balance sheet you represent. And if I'm in trouble," she'd asked, her voice small, "you will never be in real trouble." He'd smiled, a rare, warm expression. He tapped a heavy, black, old-fashioned telephone on his desk. This was his red line, a secure satellite phone that didn't go through any switchboard. "You will have this number. You will memorize it. You will only use it in the most dire of circumstances, and you will use the code phrase we practiced." The code phrase was from a game they played when she was a child. "The Iron Eagle is nesting." "If I hear those words," he'd said, his eyes turning serious, "I will know the test is over, and I will come, and I will bring the full resources of this family to bear on whatever or whoever has threatened you." Nora had agreed, eagerly. She was tired of the bodyguards, of the whispers, of the way boys her age either fawned over her or were too terrified to speak to her. And so Nora Vance died, and Nora Hart was born. She got a degree in library science. She moved to a mid-sized suburban town. She got a job at the local library. And she met Liam Ashford. Liam had loved Nora Hart. He loved her for her quiet jokes, her love of dusty old books, and the way she'd listened to his own dreams of being an architect, dreams his father had crushed in favor of the family business. When they decided to get married, Nora had a choice: reveal the truth or continue the test. She looked at Liam, at his simple, honest love, and she chose to continue. She didn't want to poison this one real thing. She'd tell him on their 5th anniversary, when the agreement with her grandfather was over. She was 3 years into the marriage. 2 years to go. She had, in her darkest moments, been tempted. When Matilda locked her out of the house for an hour in the rain for forgetting to buy the right brand of milk. When Gregory lost the paycheck from her part-time library job, claiming it must have gotten mixed in with the junk mail. When Chloe borrowed and lost the one piece of jewelry Nora kept from her mother, a simple locket. Each time she'd held on. She loved Liam. He was just weak. His family was a vortex, and he was caught in the spin. He would get better. He would find his spine. She just had to be patient. That night, after the garden party humiliation, she sat on the small cot-sized bed in their guest room turned storage closet that the Ashfords had given her. Her cheek throbbed. Her hands were crisscrossed with small red cuts from the broken glass. Liam entered, closing the door softly. He sat on the edge of the bed, not touching her. "Ellie," he whispered. She said nothing. She just stared at her cut-up hands. "My mother. She has a temper. You know how she is." She was embarrassed. "She slapped me," Nora said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "She slapped me in front of 50 people. I know, and you did break a lot of crystal. It was a big reaction, but..." Nora turned to him. The look in her eyes finally made him stop. The warmth was gone. In its place was something cold and brittle. "You did nothing," she said. "What was I supposed to do?" "Nora. Start a fistfight with my own mother. You were supposed to say something. You were supposed to tell me to go inside. You were supposed to hand me a bandage. You were supposed to look at me like I was your wife, not your servant. It's complicated, Ellie," he said, running his hands through his hair. "My dad's business. It's really struggling. We're trying to land this big contract with a new supplier, and that's tied to Chad's father, and we need to keep up appearances. We can't have drama. We can't have drama." Her public humiliation, her pain was drama. "Get out," she whispered. "What? Get out. I want to sleep." Liam, looking relieved to be escaping a confrontation, nodded. "Okay. Yeah, we'll talk in the morning. Things will be better in the morning." He left. Nora locked the door. She sat in the dark for a long time. She looked at her hands. The test wasn't about finding someone who loved her. The test was about surviving the world without the armor of her name. And she was failing. The morning did not bring clarity. It brought a new, more sinister kind of storm. Nora woke up to the sound of her door being unlocked. Matilda Ashford stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, a look of triumphant disgust on her face. Chloe was behind her, filming with her phone. "Get up," Matilda commanded. Nora, her heart pounding, pulled the thin blanket around herself. What's wrong? What's wrong?" Matilda laughed, a dry, ugly sound. "I'll tell you what's wrong. You thieving, worthless little rat. I knew it. I knew from the day my son brought you home that you were trash." I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, you don't?" Matilda strode into the room, Chloe trailing her like a vulture. "Then what I wonder is this." She ripped open the top drawer of Nora's small dresser, the one containing her underwear and socks. Matilda plunged her hand in, rummaged for a moment, and then pulled her hand out. Clutched in her fingers was a heavy antique gold locket studded with small, dull diamonds. "My grandmother's locket?" Matilda breathed, her voice filled with fake theatrical pain. "The one thing I cherished most in this world. The locket that went missing from my jewelry box this morning." Nora's blood turned to ice. She stared at the locket. She had never seen it before in her life. I didn't." "You didn't what?" Matilda screamed. "You didn't steal it. Then how did it get in your drawer, you filthy liar? You were probably going to sell it. After you broke all my crystal, you decided to just steal from me." "I would never," Nora cried, scrambling out of bed. "Matilda, I swear to you I have no idea how that got there." "Of course you don't." Chloe sneered, her phone's camera light a red, demonic eye. "Things just magically appear in your drawers. Maybe it was the library fairy." "This is it, Nora," Matilda said, her voice dropping to a cold, calm level that was far more terrifying than her yelling. "I have put up with you. I have tolerated your presence in my home, your leeching off my son, your constant embarrassment. But this is a crime. You have committed a crime." "What are you going to do?" Nora whispered, backing against the wall. "What am I going to do?" Matilda smiled a thin, cruel slash. "I'm going to do what I should have done 3 years ago. I'm calling the police." "No. Please, Matilda, don't. I didn't do it." Nora looked past her, desperation in her eyes. Liam and Gregory were standing in the hallway, drawn by the noise. "Liam," she cried. Liam, please, tell her. Tell them I wouldn't do this. Liam looked at the locket in his mother's hand. He looked at his wife, cornered and terrified. He looked at his father, whose face was a stony mask of agreement. Mum, Liam started, his voice weak. Maybe it was a mistake. A mistake, Gregory snapped, stepping forward. She was caught red-handed, Liam. Are you blind or just stupid? This girl is a common thief. What else has she taken? How much of our money has she siphoned away? No, Nora sobbed. I've never taken a penny from you. I work, Silence, Matilda yelled. I've already made the call. They're on their way. Pack your things, Nora. You are no longer welcome in this house. You're kicking me out. I'm having you arrested, Matilda corrected. And when you get out of jail, you are not coming back here. Gregory, get her a trash bag. That's all she deserves. Liam just stood there, his mouth opening and closing silently. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The next hour was a blur of absolute dehumanizing horror. Two police officers looking bored and slightly annoyed at being called to a domestic dispute arrived. Matilda put on a tearful, distraught victim performance that would have won an Oscar. She showed them the locket, showed them where she found it. Ma'am, do you want to press charges? One officer asked. Absolutely, Matilda said, dabbing a dry eye. I want her charged to the fullest extent of the law. I want to send a message. We do not tolerate this. The officers, with a sigh, turned to Nora. Ma'am, you'll need to come with us. They didn't handcuff her, but the implication was the same. They led her in her pajamas and the same worn cardigan she'd fallen asleep in out of the house, past Chloe, who was still filming, past Gregory, who looked satisfied, and past Liam. She stopped in front of him. The officers paused, giving her a moment. Liam, she said, her voice hoarse. One word. Just say you believe me. Just one word, and I can fight to this. Liam looked at her, his face an agonizing portrait of weakness. He was terrified of his mother, of his father, of the scene of the police. He was terrified of everything. He couldn't say it. He just shook his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, and looked away. That was the moment Nora's heart, which had been cracked and bruised for 3 years, finally shattered. It wasn't the slap. It wasn't the accusation. It was this. The final deafening silence from the man who had promised to love and protect her. Let's go, Nora said to the officers, her voice now empty. She was taken to the local police station. She was fingerprinted. They took her picture. She was put in a small, cold holding cell that smelled of bleach and despair. She was a common thief, a nobody, worthless. She sat on the metal bench, the cold seeping into her bones, and for the first time in her 27 years, Nora Vance truly, completely gave up. She was in the holding cell for 6 hours. The officers, after questioning her, seemed to realize the situation for what it was. A flimsy he said, she said domestic mess. There was no proof Nora had taken the locket, only that it was found in her room. Nora, in a quiet, monotone voice, explained her side. She explained the abuse, the cruelty, the systematic humiliation. Look, lady, the older officer, a man named Sergeant Riley, said, rubbing his eyes. I believe you. I've seen families like this my whole career. The mother-in-law's story has more holes than a spaghetti strainer. But she is the one pressing charges, and the locket was in your room. My hands are tied. So, what happens? Nora asked, her voice cracking. We can't hold you. There's not enough. We're releasing you on your own recognizance. But you've got a court date for an arraignment. And Mrs. Ashford. She filed a temporary restraining order. You can't go within 500 feet of the house. He pushed a small bag of her belongings, her shoes, her cardigan, her keys, which were now useless, through the slot. You're free to go. Free. She was free to be homeless, jobless, and facing a criminal charge. She walked out of the police station into the late afternoon gloom. It had started to drizzle a cold, miserable rain that matched her soul. She had no coat. She had her library ID and she checked her cardigan pocket. A single crumpled $20 bill. She had no one. Her friends from the library. They were acquaintances, not call at 3 a.m. from jail friends. And Liam. She looked at her cheap pay-as-you-go phone. No missed calls. No texts. He hadn't even checked to see if she was okay. She walked. She didn't know where she was going. She just walked until her shoes were soaked and her hair was plastered to her stinging cheek. She ended up at a 24-hour diner, the Open sign, a lonely neon beacon. She slid into a cracked vinyl booth, the $20 bill crumpled in her hand. A waitress, seeing her state, took pity and brought her a cup of black coffee without asking. "Tough night, honey," the waitress said, not unkindly. Nora just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She sat there for an hour, nursing the single cup of coffee the diner's patrons, a blur of muffled conversations and clattering plates. She was at the bottom. This was it. There was no further down to fall. She had endured the insults. She had endured the servitude. She had even somehow endured the slap. But the accusation of theft, the cold metal of the holding cell, and the absolute gut-wrenching betrayal of her husband. That was the end. The test was over. Her promise to her grandfather was to find true love. But the agreement also had a fail-safe. In the most dire of circumstances, what she thought a bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling in her chest could be more dire than this. She thought about the phone number. She'd recited it to herself every night before bed for 5 years, a mental lifeline. She thought about the code. The Iron Eagle is nesting. It felt absurd, like a line from a spy movie. She was just a woman in a diner, soaked and beaten down. But she was also a Vance. She pulled out her phone. The battery was at 14%. She looked around the diner. There was a payphone in the back near the restrooms. It felt more appropriate, more final. She slid out of the booth, leaving the $20 bill on the table. "For the coffee and the trouble," she said to the waitress. She walked to the payphone. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely punch in the numbers. It was a long, complex international number that she knew by heart, routed through 3 different satellite networks, before landing on a single secure line in a concrete bunker of a room in Geneva. It rang once. A click. No greeting, just a sterile, silent open line. Nora took a deep, shuddering breath. Her voice was a broken whisper. "The Iron Eagle is nesting." A pause. For a terrifying second, she thought she'd gotten the number wrong, that a stranger was listening. Then a voice on the other end. It was male, crisp, and held an accent she couldn't place, a perfect, emotionless, transatlantic sound. "Acknowledged Ms. Vance. Your location is confirmed via cell tower triangulation. A clean phone has been remotely activated. Check the women's restroom 3rd stall inside the sanitary disposal unit. Await instructions. Stand by." Click. He hung up. Nora stood there, the receiver still pressed to her ear. Miss Vance. He had called her Miss Vance. She slowly hung up the phone. Her legs felt weak. She walked into the women's restroom. It was empty. She went to the third stall. Her hand trembled as she opened the small metal box on the wall. Tucked inside, underneath the liner, was a small sealed plastic bag. Inside was a black, featureless burner phone, the kind she'd only seen in movies. She took it out. As if on cue, the screen lit up. A single text message, asset secured. Go to the Pendleton Hotel. A room is booked under your name. A car is 10 minutes out. Black sedan. Do not speak to anyone. We are en route. She walked out of the restroom a different woman than the one who had walked in. The despair was still there, but it was now overlaid with something else. Something cold, sharp, and heavy. The Vances were coming. The Ashfords were celebrating. Matilda, having recovered from the trauma of the morning, was holding court in her living room. Gregory had opened a bottle of what he called 20-year-old scotch. It was a $40 blend he'd poured into a crystal decanter. I tell you, Gregory said, swirling his glass. I feel cleaner. Like we've finally fumigated the house. She was a parasite, Dad. Chloe agreed, scrolling through her phone, probably deleting all the photos that had Nora in the background. I'm just glad Mum finally stood up to her. And Liam. He finally saw the light. Liam, in fact, was not seeing the light. He was sitting in the corner nursing a beer, his stomach in a cold, tight knot. He'd spent the last 8 hours in a state of growing panic. He'd tried calling Nora's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He'd called the police station, and they'd confirmed she'd been released. Released. Into the rain. With no money. No phone. No him. He had failed. He knew it. The look in her eyes as the police led her away. It was a look of such complete, devastating finality. He had broken her. Liam, stop moping, Matilda snapped, noticing his expression. You should be celebrating. You're free, we're filing for an annulment tomorrow. We'll say she, I don't know, fraudulently misrepresented herself. Which is true. She was a common thief. Now you can finally find a girl from a good family, like Chad. Yeah, buddy, Chad, Chloe's fiancé, said, clapping him on the back. Plenty of fish in the sea, and you just got rid of the carp, the gross bottom feeder one. Liam just nodded, taking another swallow of beer. He felt sick. The celebration was interrupted by a new sound. It started faint, a low, rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Gregory muted the TV. Is that a helicopter? Must be the news for that pile-up on the interstate, Chad said, heading to the window. The sound grew. It wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration. The crystal glasses on the shelf began to chatter. The whump, whump, whump was now a deep, guttural thwup, thwup, thwup that shook the very foundations of the house. My God, Gregory said, joining Chad at the window. It's not on the news, it's here. Matilda and Chloe ran to the window. Their mouths fell open. Descending from the darkening sky, its landing lights like the eyes of an angry god, was a helicopter. But it wasn't a small news chopper. This was a monster. A sleek black military-grade Sikorsky S-92. It was the kind of machine that transported presidents, not suburbanites. It was not landing in the street. It was landing on their lawn. The immaculate 50-foot by 50-foot patch of Kentucky bluegrass that Matilda preened over was now the center of a hurricane. The downdraft flattened her prize-winning rose bushes. It sent patio furniture, the same furniture from yesterday's party, skittering across the flagstones like. A lawn gnome was decapitated by a flying lawn chair. "My zoning," Matilda shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated suburban rage. "They can't do that. Gregory, call the police. I think—" Liam whispered, his face white as a sheet. "I think they are the police." The massive aircraft settled onto the lawn, with a gentle sigh of hydraulics that seemed to mock the chaos it had caused. The turbines began to wind down, but the presence of the machine was overwhelming. It was an alien, terrifying object in their tiny, manicured world. The side door slid open. But it wasn't a SWAT team that emerged. First, two men in identical, impeccably tailored black suits stepped out. They moved with a fluid, predatory grace. They wore earpieces. They did not look like lawyers. They scanned the property, their eyes missing nothing, and took up positions on either side of the door. Second, a man in a different kind of suit, a dark grey bespoke suit that probably cost more than Gregory's car, stepped out holding a thin silver briefcase. He looked angry. He looked like a man who billed 2,000 an hour and was annoyed to be here. Third, Who is that?" Chloe whispered, her phone, now recording this new bizarre event. The third man to emerge was older, in his late 70s, but he moved with a disturbing vitality. He was tall, with a shock of thick white hair. He was wearing a dark cashmere overcoat, despite the mild evening. As he stepped onto the grass, he looked at the house with a look of profound, chilling disappointment. He ignored the stunned faces in the window. He ignored the two men in suits. He turned back to the helicopter and offered his hand. And out of the helicopter, stepping onto the ruined lawn, was Nora. But it was not the Nora they knew. The cheap, worn cardigan was gone. The stringy, rain-soaked hair was gone. This Nora was wearing a sharp, dark wool coat. Her hair had been pulled back into a severe, elegant bun. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, but her chin was up. She didn't look defeated. She looked like a queen. She stood next to the old man, who put a protective, proprietary arm around her shoulder. "Who is that?" Matilda hissed, her voice a mix of confusion and fear. Liam knew. In that single gut-punching moment, he finally understood. He remembered a story Nora had told him years ago, which he'd dismissed as a fantasy. A story about a grandfather, a large house, and a childhood that seemed too fantastic to be real. He'd thought it was a coping mechanism for an orphan. He looked at the man's wrist. Even from 50 feet away, he recognized the glint of a Patek Philippe Grand Complications watch. He looked at the helicopter now with the Vance family crest discreetly visible on the tail fin. "Oh God," Liam whispered, sinking into a chair. "Oh no." The old man, Cornelius Vance, looked up at the window, his eyes finding Liam's. He didn't glower. He didn't threaten. He just looked disappointed. And that was so much worse. Then the man with the briefcase, Marcus Thorne, looked at his watch and began walking toward the front door. The doorbell rang. The sound was so normal, so mundane, it was almost comical after the arrival of a 10-ton military-grade aircraft. For a moment, no one in the Ashford living room moved. They were frozen, staring at the front door as if expecting it to explode. The bell rang again. 2 sharp, impatient chimes. "Gregory, answer it!" Matilda hissed, finally breaking the spell. Gregory, his face slick with a confused sweat, stumbled to the door. He fumbled with the deadbolt and pulled it open. Standing on his porch were 3 men. The 2 in black suits, Director Shaw, as his ID badge discreetly read, and his subordinate flanked a 3rd man. This was Marcus Thorne, the man with the briefcase. He was average height, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, but he radiated an aura of such compressed high-stakes intelligence that Gregory instinctively took a step back. He looked like a man who didn't just win lawsuits, he annihilated them. "McGregory Ashford?" Thorne asked, his voice a smooth, polished baritone. "Yes, I am Marcus Thorne. I am a partner with the law firm of Skadden Arps, Slate, Mager and Flom. I am here as legal counsel for Mr. Cornelius Vance and his granddaughter Miss Nora Vance, whom I believe you know as Nora Ashford." The use of a real top-tier law firm, a name Gregory associated with hostile takeovers and billion-dollar mergers, hit him like a physical blow. I don't... Thorne didn't wait for an invitation. He simply stepped past Gregory and into the foyer, his 2 security men following, taking up positions that simultaneously blocked the exit and gave them a clear view of the entire ground floor. They didn't look armed, but the bulges under their jackets were not wallets. "Mrs. Matilda Ashford," Thorne said, nodding to the woman who was still clutching her curtains. "Miss Chloe Ashford, Mr. Liam Ashford." He knew all their names. What is the meaning of this? Matilda finally found her voice, her suburban rage overpowering her newfound fear. "You've destroyed my lawn. You're trespassing. I'm calling the police again." "That won't be necessary," Thorne said, his voice laced with ice. "I've already been in contact with Sergeant Riley at the local precinct. He was most interested to learn of the security footage we've just acquired." "Security footage," Gregory stammered. "Indeed. From the diner Nora visited, from the street cameras, and most importantly, from the internal nanny cam your daughter Chloe installed in the hallway, which we discovered with a simple electronic sweep. The one that clearly shows her planting the locket in Nora's room this morning." Chloe made a small, strangled sound, and her phone clattered to the floor. "Slander!" Matilda shrieked. "Lies! We don't have a nanny cam." "You did," Thorne said, tapping his briefcase. "The digital logs are, shall we say, quite clear. Falsifying a police report, Mr. Ashford. That's a felony. Perjury. Conspiracy, shall I continue?" The room was silent, save for Chloe's panicked breathing. Thorne clicked open his briefcase. "But that is a matter for the criminal courts. We are here this evening to discuss the civil matter." He pulled out a thick bound document and slapped it onto the coffee table. "This," he said, "is a lawsuit for $50 million. 50 million. Gregory choked, collapsing onto his tacky, overstuffed sofa. "A conservative estimate," Thorne said dryly. "For 3 years of emotional distress, slander, defamation, libel, unlawful imprisonment, and let me check my notes. Oh yes, battery." He looked directly at Matilda. Her face had gone from purple to a pasty, sickly white. "The slap," Thorne continued, his voice devoid of emotion, "was witnessed by no less than 43 guests, many of whom were happy to provide recorded statements to our investigators in exchange for, let's call it, disassociating themselves from this." He wasn't finished. This was just the legal battalion. Now came the financial one. Thorne pulled out a second document. "Now to the more pressing issue. Gregory Ashford. Your company, Ashford Imports." Gregory's head snapped up. "That's none of your business." "It became our business at 9:15 a.m. this morning," Thorne said, "when a holding company owned by Mr. Vance acquired the entirety of your outstanding commercial debt from HSBC. A debt I see of $4.8 million. You can't. We can. And we did. And as the new owners of your debt, we are calling it in. Payment is due in full, as of tomorrow. End of business. I don't have $4.8 million. Gregory was hyperventilating. I'll be ruined. You are already ruined, Mr. Ashford, Thorne said. You just haven't realized it yet. He turned to Matilda. Mrs. Ashford, your charity, the Ashford Fund for Children. Very noble. It's a slush fund. Thorne cut her off. And a very poorly managed one at that. An anonymous tip has already been made to the IRS regarding discrepancies. An audit is scheduled for 8:00 a.m. Monday. We expect them to find exactly what our forensic accountants found this afternoon. He turned to Chloe. Ms. Ashford, your engagement to Mr. Chad Rinaldi, is it? Chad, who had been hiding behind the sofa, winced. The Rinaldi family's construction empire does quite a bit of business with several Vance-owned subsidiaries. Mr. Rinaldi Sr. was devastated to learn of his son's association with a family facing felony fraud charges. The wedding, I'm afraid, is off, and Chad. Your job at your father's company has been re-evaluated. Chad looked like he was going to be sick. The army hadn't fired a shot. They hadn't touched anyone. They had simply, in the space of 5 minutes, dismantled the Ashfords' entire fragile world. Through it all, Nora and her grandfather had stood on the porch just outside the open door, listening. Cornelius Vance had his hand on his granddaughter's shoulder, a silent, grounding presence. Now, as the financial and legal executions concluded, he stepped inside. The 2 security men, Director Shaw and his associate, moved with him, their presence filling the room with a heavy, unspoken threat. They weren't there to hurt anyone. They were there to make sure no one moved in a way they didn't like. They were a physical manifestation of the new power dynamic. The Ashfords were no longer in their own home. They were in a holding cell. Cornelius Vance surveyed the room. He looked at the garish furniture, the cheap art on the walls that terrified broken people. His gaze was not one of rage. It was one of profound anthropological curiosity, as if he were observing a particularly unpleasant species of insect. He looked at Gregory, who was now weeping openly into his hands. He looked at Matilda, who was staring at him, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. He looked at Chloe, who was rocking back and forth, her social life in cinders. Finally, his eyes landed on Liam. Liam, who had not said a word. He was just staring at Nora, his face a mask of dawning, agonizing horror. This was the woman he had failed. This was the family he had allowed his own to torture. You, Cornelius said. His voice was not loud. It was a low, gravelly rumble, a voice accustomed to absolute, immediate obedience. Liam stood up, his legs shaking. Sir, You had a diamond, Cornelius said, his voice cutting through the man's pathetic excuses. A flawless, priceless diamond. And you let your family treat her like a piece of common glass. I love her, Liam burst out, a desperate final plea. Nora Ellie. I love you. I was scared. I was weak. But I love you. Nora looked at him. The man she had loved, the man she had built her life around. She saw him finally for what he was. Not a monster. Not an evil man. Just a coward. A hollow man, terrified of his own shadow, who had let his weakness curdle into cruelty. "No, you don't," Nora said, her voice clear and strong. It was the first time she had spoken. "You don't love me. You loved the idea of me. The quiet, simple, uncomplicated girl who asked for nothing. The girl who made you feel strong because she was so worthless." She spat the word back at them, the word Matilda had used. "The second it got hard," Nora continued, stepping away from her grandfather and into the center of the room. "The second I needed you to be a man, to be a husband. You looked at your shoes." "Ellie, please. I can fix this," he begged. "Fix what, Liam?" Nora asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Fix the fact that you watched your mother slap me and did nothing. Fix the fact that you let me be arrested. You let me, your wife, get put in a cell to save yourself from an argument with your mother." She walked over to him. He was taller than her, but in that moment he had never seemed so small. "There is nothing to fix," she said. "We are not broken. We are finished." She turned from him. She faced Matilda, who was now clutching her pearls as if they were a life raft. "Was it fun?" Nora asked. I don't. Was it fun?" Nora repeated. "To have someone to hurt, to feel so big by making me feel so small. All those years, all those insults, all that hate. I hope it was worth it. I hope you enjoyed it. Because, as Mr. Thorne said, it's going to cost you $50 million. Nora walked to the hallway. Director Shaw. The security man nodded to his associate, who stepped forward. "Miss Vance, you said you had belongings to retrieve." "Yes," Nora said. "A small box in the guest room." "I'll get it, ma'am," the man said. "No," Nora said firmly. "I will." She held her head high and walked up the stairs, the same stairs she had scrubbed on her hands and knees. Director Shaw followed not to help, but to guard. She entered the small, cramped room. It looked as it had when she'd been dragged out. It didn't feel like her prison anymore. It just felt sad. She didn't pack her clothes. They were all tainted. She went to the small, loose floorboard under the bed, the one place she'd kept her real life. She pulled it up. Inside was a small, velvet-wrapped box. Inside was a simple locket. Not the gaudy one Chloe had planted, but a small platinum locket. Her mother's. The one she had told the Ashfords was lost. She'd lied. She'd hidden it, sensing they would one day take it. She put it on. It felt cool against her skin. She walked back downstairs. Her grandfather, Mr. Thorne, and the second security man were waiting in the foyer. The Ashfords were still frozen in their living room, a tableau of their own destruction. Nora walked past them toward the door. "Nora, wait." It was Liam. He'd run to the foyer, his face undone with desperate, true grief. The grief not of losing a wife, but of realizing he had just lost everything. The money, the status, the one good thing in his life. "Please, don't go. What will I do?" That was the question. Not, "What will you do?" but, "What will I do?" Nora stopped at the doorway. She looked back at him, a creature of pity. "I don't know, Liam," she said. "For the first time in your life, I guess you'll have to figure it out for yourself." She turned her back on him and walked out the front door into the night air, which now felt clean and cool. The thwop, thwop, thwop of the helicopter blades started to spin up a promise of escape. The walk across the ruined lawn to the helicopter felt like a mile. The wind from the rotors whipped her hair from its bun, but Nora didn't mind. It felt like it was blowing away the last 3 years of filth and compromise. Cornelius helped her up into the cavernous, leather-lined interior of the S-92. It was quiet inside, the sound of the engines, a distant, powerful hum. Director Shaw and Mr. Thorne climbed in after them, strapping themselves into the passenger seats without a word. The door slid shut, sealing them in. Nora looked out the window. She could see the Ashfords framed in their living room window, like figures in a dollhouse. Gregory was on the phone, probably to a lawyer who wouldn't be able to help him. Matilda had fainted a limp pile on the sofa. And Liam was standing on the porch, his hands in his hair, watching the helicopter, watching his life fly away. The helicopter lifted off a powerful vertical ascent. The house, the manicured street, the whole tiny, toxic neighborhood shrank beneath them until it was just another patch in the suburban quilt. Nora kept watching until it was gone. "Are you all right, my dear?" Cornelius asked, his voice a low rumble. He had taken her hand, his own large, warm and solid. Nora nodded, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a clean path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. "I am now Grandpa." She whispered the name, feeling foreign and familiar on her tongue. "You did well," he said, patting her hand. "The test was harder than I ever intended. I wanted you to find love, not that." "I thought it was love," Nora said, looking at her hands, the small, faint white scars from the broken glass still visible. "I really did. I thought his weakness was just gentleness. I thought his fear was modesty." "They are often mistaken for one another," Cornelius said, "until the fire. In the fire you find out what a person is really made of. Tin or steel." "He was tin," Nora said. "He was tin," Cornelius agreed. They flew in silence for a while, the lights of the city spreading out below them like a carpet of diamonds. What happens to them?" Nora asked, not because she cared, but because she needed to know. "Mr. Thorne." Cornelius nodded to the lawyer, who was already on his laptop. Thorne looked up, adjusting his glasses. "Ms. Vance, the criminal charges against the Ashford family for filing a false police report conspiracy and for Mrs. Ashford battery will proceed. Given the evidence, a conviction is all but certain. They will likely avoid jail time, being first offenders, but the probation and fines will be significant. And the civil suit. Mr. Vance has instructed me to pursue it to the fullest extent," Thorne said. "We will not see 50 million, of course. They don't have it. But we will take everything they do have. The house will be foreclosed to cover the debt. The business is already in receivership. Gregory Ashford will be lucky to get a job as a greeter at Walmart. Mrs. Ashford's charity is being dissolved by the State Attorney General. Chloe Ashford has, I believe, already been served with the restraining order Chad's family filed against her." He said it all with the mild, dispassionate tone of a man reading a weather report. "And Liam?" Nora asked. "He is included in all civil and criminal proceedings as a co-conspirator by way of his inaction. He will be as ruined as the rest of them. He will be bankrupt by Christmas." Nora nodded. She felt nothing. Not pity, not satisfaction. Just empty. It was the nothing of a closed door. "Good," she said, and she was surprised to find she meant it. "Where are we going?" she asked, turning to her grandfather. "Home," he said, smiling. "To New York. It's time for Nora Vance to come back to the world. You've been gone too long." The helicopter banked east toward the rising sun. Nora leaned her head against the cool window. She was free. She was no longer Nora Hart, the library assistant. She was no longer Nora Ashford, the worthless wife. She was Nora Vance, and her private army of lawyers of security, of devastating financial power, was just a phone call away. But as she looked at her own reflection in the glass, at the strong, tired but unbroken woman, looking back, she had a feeling she wouldn't be needing them. She had survived the fire, and she had learned the hard way that she was not made of tin. She was made of steel. Thank you for watching this story. It's a powerful reminder that a person's worth is never ever determined by the people who try to tear them down. Nora's in-laws saw her as worthless because they were so blinded by their own insecurity and greed. They forgot the most important rule: never ever underestimate a quiet woman. You never know what kind of power or what kind of army she has behind her. What did you think of the Ashfords' takedown? Was it too much, or was it exactly the karma they deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story and want to hear more tales of dramatic karma, stunning twists and powerful comebacks, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. We have new stories coming every week, and you won't want to miss a single one.